Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and in today's video, we are kicking off what I'm calling Stag Week here on the channel. As I look back, I realized that I hadn't reviewed batches 23A, B, or C, and C was kind of a surprise batch, I think, to a lot of us. And because of that, I figured instead of peppering these in with the other reviews here and there, why not knock all of them out in the same week, one day after the other? We're doing 3 days straight of Stag reviews, and then on Thursday night's live stream for this week, we are going to put these things side by side in a blind tasting and see which one of these comes out on top. Now, of course, if you're watching this in real time, you have to wait until the next day for the next one to come out, but if you're watching this well after the fact, then you have a lot of Stag content to binge if you so choose. If you only have one of these batches and you only care about one of the particular reviews, that's cool, check that one out. But maybe this is interesting for those of you trying to figure out how all of these compare, or maybe you have the option to, buy one of the three and you want to know which one it should be. Hopefully this series can help you. And for me, it's just kind of fun because 3 days of Stag tasting in a row, not really a bad thing, let's say. So let's talk about what we have here today. Because we are kicking this series off, we're, of course, starting with 23A. This is coming in at 130.2 proof. And I want to say thank you to Zack Butler for sending this sample my way. I also have batch 22A. This is 132.2, so exactly 2 proof points higher than the 23A that we're tasting today. This is just a point of comparison to kind of get everything centered as we begin Stag Week right now. So I might reference it throughout the video. I have tasted these two actually in a blind flight or a blind head-to-head against each other, and it was a very close call. The other batches, B and C, I haven't tasted those at all, so those are going to be completely new. Even though I've tasted 23A, I don't really remember it, so I'm going to jog my memory now. Let's get into this thing on the nose. Again, 130.2 proof. Let's see what we get. All right, so right away, the first impression for me is that this is a brighter, lighter, and sweeter batch of Stag, mostly. There still are dark notes in here, and we're going to talk about that. I'm not saying this is all, bright vanilla, but there is a huge vanilla note that's present in this whiskey, and some lighter fruits and kind of sour fruits as well. If I had to kind of relate this to an earlier batch of Stag, I would say that Stag Junior Batch 15, which I think maybe came out at the end of 2020, that batch was very vanilla forward, a lot of kind of candy shop strawberry candy sweetness in that one. This has some elements of that. I don't think it's entirely there. This still feels rich and full out of the glass. It really jumps out at you, which is nice. I mean, I guess none of these Stags are typically shy. They're pretty high proof, pretty intense pours, barrel proof, 7 to 9 years old is the rumor of the blends. But this does jump out of the glass, but it does have that little bit of a brighter, sweeter profile overall. So just below that kind of vanilla note that I'm talking about, I'm going to call a few fruits out. Number one, I do get a little of this orange peel citrus, this kind of prickly, almost effervescent kind of orange peel note that's popping through the texture a little bit. There's also some sour green apple. You might even go so far as to say sour green Jolly Rancher, maybe, but at the end of the day, I just get this kind of green apple tanginess, and it is a little bit of that candy sweetness in there as well. Now, kind of below those fruit notes, there's a note in this 23A that I've been picking up on recent releases of Stag, and that is, in this case, I would call this a waffle cone note, but on the others, sometimes I've referred to it as a baked goods profile. I've also said that it feels like a croissant, like fresh out of the oven, some kind of toasty breadiness. I'm going to go waffle cone here, but if you pick something up in this whiskey, if you're nosing and tasting this along with me, let me know what you think about that. But I'm calling it a waffle cone for right now. It's kind of like your caramel note in the whiskey to some degree, but it's really coming off with that kind of almost brittle texture of a waffle cone. All right, and it would not be a batch of Stag without the standard Buffalo Trace notes. There is a grape soda / grape syrup note in the glass. It's at the base of the whiskey. This kind of melds together with a chocolate note, some bigger barrel char notes as well. And I've got to say, in this whiskey, there's a huge oak presence. Like, the oak is not is not combining with these darker notes necessarily. It almost stands alone. It's like I smell all these notes in the whiskey from light to dark, and then there's the oak. It's its own separate entity at the bottom. It feels heavy. I like it. I kind of like that it's not well integrated because this whiskey has so many layers that it feels like that you can really pick them apart. So I would say for me on the nose, this whiskey has a high level of complexity. It's not my favorite profile. I usually prefer the Staggs that just blast you out with super dark notes. For instance, this 22A, this is all just the craziest dark fruit notes. It's the darkest batch for me since batch 12, and that's my personal favorite. So I prefer this kind of a profile, but I've got to say the complexity of batch 23A is very nice. And one final thing I want to call out on the nose before I taste this is that there's a little bit of a savory element in the whiskey, which does sort of weave its way through those darker notes. The grape soda that I talked about, the barrel char, the chocolate. It's almost like a soy sauce note. So look out for that. Tell me if you think I'm crazy in the comments section. But I do find that some of these Staggs, because of the huge oak influence and the big barrel char notes, they can sometimes get to that edge of feeling savory, and I think this one has some of that note. All right, on the palate now. Cheers. And this thing drinks incredibly well. Front of the palate, for me, is effervescent. I mean, that is the word that comes to mind. I think I may have mentioned that with that kind of orange peel citrus note that was kind of popping through. This is all effervescent front of the palate. It's like this, it's like when you drink 7-Up or drink Sprite. I mean, that's the feeling on the end of your tongue when it's got that fizziness. Totally. Vanilla, orange citrus note, that sour green apple, that's really the front of the tongue. So it kicks off with an interesting combination of these spices, these sour fruits. Again, I think this is a complex whiskey. I really do. As it rolls back, you do get into some more of the meat of the whiskey, that kind of baked goods note mid-palate. Just big oak influence. And now as we're into the finish, interestingly enough, the finish is not particularly oaky or leather forward or barrel char or bitter. It actually feels very nice on the finish. And I expected this whiskey to be very oaky because of how oaky it was on the nose. But the finish, I think it retains its freshness. I really enjoy this. So we're going to do one more sip now. Second sip, a little less pop on the front of the palate now that I've kind of gotten used to that effervescence. And this is now grape soda on the palate. Big grape soda note. Some chocolate, or maybe like a milk chocolate is coming to play right now. But all the while, I'm telling you, like this citrus thing is really driving the whiskey for me right now. And I don't feel like I've talked about citrus this much in a batch of Stagg recently, but it's interesting nonetheless. And I would be curious to hear from you guys if you have the same experience with this whiskey. I think this is a great batch. I think the nose, while it does have all these layers, it does lack a little cohesion, but that's okay, because I think it's a fun whiskey to really pick apart throughout all of these layers from bright to dark. I think where it shines is the palate and the finish. It's got a great long finish that doesn't get too bitter or oaky, which a lot of the Staggs do. And on the palate, it just drinks so intensely, but it's rich and full of flavor. And this front of the tongue experience that you get from this is pretty different for me. So actually, you know what? Let's do one sip of the 22A because I want to see if this drinks a little bit differently. Yeah, totally. This is more of like a flat or like a blunt delivery on the palate of just super dark fruit notes. A little savoriness in this one too, actually, that kind of soy sauce thing that I talked about on 23A. But this one doesn't deliver with as much effervescence, definitely not as much citrus, and it comes forward more just as a, I don't want to say a one-trick pony, but a little bit. It's like the Napa Cab of Stagg batches for me, where it's just this intense, one-dimensional kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think that 23A sets itself apart with the drinking experience and the number of layers in the whiskey. And I would love to hear from all of you what you think, but that's going to do it for this first edition of, well, I guess Stagg Week. And we've got 2 more to go, plus a live stream with a blind tasting. So let me know what you think in the comment section below, and tune in for 23B, which is going to be the next review. Cheers, and I'll see you soon here on Drums and Drams.